Good morning, noon, evening or night, depending when you're watching this video. My name is Legend and welcome back to World of Tanks, and not the map series, the map enlargement program. Unfortunately, the next entry, Mines, has been proven to be one, if not the most complex map to enlarge. Spoiler alert, within the current map itself there are also some major changes to make it all well enough developed. Nevertheless, I still have the video for you, World of Tanks map enthusiast, and I think this video will tickle your new map obsession even more. Because today we are covering what I would like to call the renaissance of World of Tanks map development. In that I have uncovered a grand total of 15 maps that have been announced to be in development on the Supertest server. Sure, they are not all quote-unquote new maps and one entry is already cancelled, but I still like to cover all of them to give you an idea that wargaming is seemingly finally listening to one of our biggest points of feedback, namely the lack of new maps. So I will cover each of those new maps, giving a quick overview of map properties and information, as well as giving my own opinion about how I think those maps will likely function and if they are any good. Because let's be honest, new maps are fine, but we don't need another Empire's Border or, God forbid, another highway. I do need to give the disclaimer, of course, that my opinion doesn't dictate the actual quality of the map, and your views and opinions can differ, including maybe even my own opinion in the future, because I, of course, haven't played on those maps, actually experiencing in practice, and these maps are not finalized yet for the common test server. Changes can be made, and hopefully for the better and not to detriment of the maps. Without further ado, let's cover all the newly announced maps in chronological order of release on the Armored Patrol, where I got most of my information from. Starting off with Rust. Type desert map, size 1000 by 1000. Iteration Supertest post second iteration. Estimated release 2026 or 2027. The reworked Kenya map from the recon mode, now with an oil refinery located in the Middle East. It has 3 new local mechanics as the first map on the Supertest to be tested out. You got elevators, interactive objects that allow vehicles to move and reposition during battle, wall of fire, an activatable area with a flame effect that deals damage, and rocket launchers. Locations where players can launch rockets at predetermined zones of the opposite flank. I have shared my opinion about this map before when it was the Kenya map in my look back at recon mode video. In the current iteration, the Heavy Tank Corridor did get more interesting, however there is still quite a distance in the open to be crossed if you want to push further forwards, forcing you to a side-scraping hull-down standoff. I would have liked if it looked more as the new Klondike Heavy Tank Corner, with more cover around the edge and cover for vehicles rushing towards the enemy's side at the lower grounds. I don't know how much the local mechanics would impact the game. I do like the sound of rockets only hitting a certain area where specifically TDs would be camping, forcing them out for even a moment. I kind of accept that the highest point with the elevator have bushes, but being very vulnerable when you do get spotted there. It's a very weird spot, all the way up there. Further inside the factory there seems to be an imbalance of cover, and I would like it to be more accessible from the sides as well. Maybe that makes the firewall obsolete, but so be it. In the other corner there's also some improvement with the inclusion of a broken down highway, creating some additional pieces of cover. All of these elements do balance it out, and with the light tank middle ground and the backline being fine, I do see the potential of this map being good. But I think it's going to be average in quality. Junction. Type, summer map. Size, 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post second iteration. Estimated release, 2027 or 2028. A large freeway railway junction at its center in an Eastern European setting. In the current version, it has moving trains as local mechanics by letting players activate the trains if they capture or trigger an objective located at the center of the map. The structuring on each side looks very decent. Of course, it's not that similar, but here that doesn't really matter. It will matter more who will take more initiative to cross the front line at the railroads, which is the biggest problem because it's so open, low, and by that vulnerable for all kinds of TD snipers in combination with other tanks who rush in and have shots at you from angles within the train track area itself. Even the elevated triangle in the middle doesn't seem to provide enough cover from all potential angles you can get sniped from. But that may be an easy fix, just elevate the middle triangle slightly so it does provide enough cover from all angles of the opposing side, and add more train wagons and create additional brawl areas for mediums that can quickly hide behind those wagons if they get caught at certain small areas where they can still get sniped from. The north of the map I like a lot. The castle area is an interesting additional flank, but not so strong that you can counter the entire enemy push from the city side because there is a lack of bushes to do so. At least not at its highest points. The city square or circle is an excellent little brawl arena where tanks can get close and personal with enough possibilities to search different angles and not so much space between large pieces of cover. I will say that more changes need to be happening at the railroad area, but with that I do think this can be one of the best maps from the bunch. Sunny Place. Type, summer map. Size, 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post second iteration. Estimated release, 2027 or 2028. Set in the Asian jungle environment inspired by natural conditions of Vietnam, it had two local mechanics, one of which can be interacted with, namely the moving trains again, this time for the iteration of the mechanic where the trains would stop if they would have been hit by a shell, creating temporarily cover on the battlefield. The other, the waterfall, is a natural cover element that blurs vehicle outlines in sniper mode. Markers will still remain visible, just the contours of the tanks will not. I like the balance between the base sides, where the southern base has more cover, the northern base has more accessible space to traverse. The local mechanics are interesting. I think the train is one of the best versions that can also be the most realistic, and the waterfall hiding the outline is way better than acting as full cover like Fog would have worked, not interfering with the game that much but giving it an edge. The left flank seems bad at first, but there are some routes to go in aggressive and still be in cover. It would be more like a live oaks corner. If you commit and the enemy do outnumber you, well, you die there. But next to that potential, it is pretty much where the good ends. The middle is a big open no man's land where again light tanks can get but have seemingly false cover as they can get fired at from multiple elevated angles. And finally, I have too much bad experiences with the airfield cave to fully trust how that flank is looking. It is more spacious and maybe that is what it needs to be, less of a ruffle stomp flank, but there is still a lot of false cover there as well, as it seems. Therefore, I can't get this map any better rating than average, and without proper balance changes, I think we got ourselves quite a bad new map. Atomic, type, summer map, size 1200 by 1200, iteration, Supertest post second iteration, estimated release, unknown. Centered around the Eastern European nuclear power plant with huge cooling towers with again 2 local mechanics. Spray ponds, which like the waterfall mentioned before hides vehicle outlines, and automatic tunnel gates, which automatically lower after 3 minutes of the start of the battle, creating new flanking opportunities. I love the looks of this map. The front lines from the left to the right are amazing. You got the cooling tower you can get into on the left side, several facility buildings that you can get into on the right. These are my favorite little pockets of all around cover with small pieces of cover within it for perfect little brawl arenas. Speaking about arenas, the water feature between the cooling towers also functions like one. I also like the fact that the underground bunker area opens up only after 3 minutes, giving you early game the opportunity to take forwards positioning without that additional flank to worry about. But in the mid and late game, giving you the opportunity to safely maneuver to different flanks. A perfect balance for this mechanic in my opinion. The only bother is with a small area of the rightmost front line where there is again quite the amount of open space to traverse. Make that middle overhang collapse or create cover underneath it to create more close range brawl positions. But furthermore, this map is good. Good light tank area this time with enough elevated cover with that bunker. Great backlines on the left flank and open bases with yet enough cover provided. Seeing that it is a larger than average map with 200 meters of additional space in both axes, it doesn't seem that it feels too vast and open with tons of barren lands. It still seems interesting enough. Yes, I think this will be a good map at least, and potentially one of the best. Empty road. Type, desert map. Size, 1200 by 1200. Iteration, Supertest post first iteration. Estimated release, unknown. Somewhere in the Middle East with an open layout with rolling terrain, several small villages and a compact oil refinery. It has no local mechanics, but it does have interactive elements, which are oil reservoirs, 6 large barrels that can create a 15-second fire zone upon destruction. Holy hell, this map is open and fast. Where Atomic had a lot of things happening in there, this map does have large areas where it is just barren. I honestly was confused if it was actually a World of Tanks map when I first saw it. I guess since it is a bigger than average map, you might get away with that additional open empty space at the corners. But it does look so weird that you can access such vast spaces with no cover at all. Especially the bottom left corner, which doesn't seem to be usable at all. But you can easily access it, not being blocked or too high in elevations like the top right corner. It has at least factory and facility buildings that you can access, which we like to see. That all around cover with small pieces of cover within. The interactive element, which is, let's be honest, it's just a local mechanic. I don't know why they are not calling it a local mechanic, but the local mechanic is okay. Again, not too invasive and could potentially break a stalemate or force someone out of his held down spot. The village in the center seems very vulnerable, not only from the hard cover of the factory side, but also from the elevated hill from the other side. When one team takes control of that, you're dead in that village, especially with all those destructible buildings in it. Speaking of that other side, it is mostly held down and just so open. I just cannot give a good opinion about that. But you know, this map really embraces the emptiness and openness well. It feels very natural for this map, and I am willing to tolerate it for this instance. I believe it has potential being quite the unique and experimental map on most flanks. It's going to take players a while to figure out how to play it, and that is why it's probably going to get bad reviews in the beginning. But I do think after a while it's going to be a hidden gem, secretly being the top 10 most favorite maps even. Nebelberg, resized. Type, summer map, size 1100 by 1100. Iteration, Supertest post 4th iteration. Estimated release, 2026 or 2027. The resized map from Grand Battles after Klondike, which means we've likely never seen Grand Battles again. Well, just one more map that hasn't been made into a smaller version. Maybe that's another video idea. No new local mechanics were added, the most notable change being the castle grounds being lowered into a swampy area with ruins. Just like Klondike, I think the map would have been constructed better if they picked the top left corner instead of the bottom right. Only with the elevator position all the way in the top left being reduced in height would be more sufficient. But we didn't get that. What I do like about this version of the map is the fact that they removed the big hill of the castle. Otherwise that would be like a mines on steroids area of advantage, with the map now reduced in size. However, with the open area left there is a very little hill cover near the middle, which limits play there from everything except light tanks. Interesting corner on the heavy tank flank with the small wall ramp around and above in that corner seems quite unique. What isn't unique is the lack of close range brawl engagement for the rest on the city map, which can only exist pretty much on that one corner and nowhere else. Although you do have at least some backup locations. I am quite the fan of the lack of bushes though on the sniper nest at the castle, and I really like the central ruin in the middle of the swamp clearing with almost all-round cover. There we got that theme again, the all-round cover. I would have liked it more if the bottom right corner would state more like the original Grand Battle map, with two elevations with a small little valley at the central line, and the two stumps on each side with more hardcover scattered around. So in the end, I think it would be an average map at best, feeling quite generic at most places with only a few spots of interest. Industrial, type, summer map, size 1200 by 1200, iteration, Supertest post 3rd iteration, estimated release 2027 or 2028. An industrial landscape featuring various production facilities located somewhere in the USSR. With potentially 5 local mechanics, it might become one of the most interactive maps so far. Because next to the elevators, trains and oil reservoirs, we got the railway turntable that activates 15 seconds after the battle begins, a giant excavator outside the map which has an unclear function as an actual gameplay mechanic so far, and finally we got fog that is likely affects spotting and visibility mechanics. So in a previous version the factory building was closer to the other buildings at the top left corner, but for some reason they created even more space between it by moving it more towards the middle. You do at least have some brawl potential within the building with the towers. Now, those towers are quite frankly ridiculous. You can take the elevator up like 8 or 9 stories high, way more extreme than the highest point on the Rust map, for example. But you have these ramps you can glide off, which makes it some kind of a fun meme feature to be tried out in training rooms. A bit like the cliffs on Overlord, which Wargaming removed. But on the serious matter, I don't think it's a good feature balance-wise, but it seems very fun to try. So that cancels my pessimism a bit to see the map more like fun. And again, the sniper nests up there at least have no bushes. The turntable, which I called out in my look back at Neon Dash video, is also quite the interesting addition, adding the wagons with cover and crossing possibilities for the central route inside the building, and having solid cover moving around, giving the potential for a breakthrough. Now the other parts of the maps are so open again, especially with such a high advantage point. It makes playing on like 75% of the map a continuous hazard or threat. Despite the interesting and unique features of the factory building, the map seems to be open and imbalanced to make proper plays, and therefore I cannot give it a good rating. And I think next to the funny memes at the tower, this will be a bad map. Swamp, reintroduced. Type, summer map. Size, 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post 3rd iteration. Estimated release, cancelled. An old removed map that was decided to be converted to the HD version. After 3 iterations, the map already diverged heavily from the original and effectively became a different location. So this map is called Swamp. But it isn't Swamp. Nothing resembles the old map anymore, except like the top left and the bottom right corner. It isn't the same, but is it better? Or is its cancellation deserved? The castle area is fine. I actually like the fact that there is a lack of hull down cover, which forces tanks to brawl while side scraping like the good old days. The city pros are found in the small spaces between the building blocks, like the random event in Runeberg and Siegfried Line, which I'm very fond of, and again, lack of bushes at the sniper positions. However, also, once again, we got a long open area in the middle, which is going to be hard to traverse. This can be adjusted by adding an additional small row of houses or walls or other covers straight through the middle of that central square. I like the small bumps near the bases with the rocks around, so you can engage snipers better when you get there. Something I really liked about the old Swamp map. The middle area is okay, with at least a central elevated ridge you can hide behind as a light tank in the beginning and mid stages of the match. The top right corner is straight out unusable and should be reworked with slightly more hardcover, but definitely not as much as it used to be on the old map, because that was quite shit as well. So it's a mixed bag once again, but to throw it away seems a bit overdramatic. It has potential with the correct improvements, but how it is now, it tends to be more towards becoming an average map. Railway station. Type, summer map. Size, 1100 by 1100. Iteration, Supertest post 2nd iteration. Estimated time of release, 2027 or 2028. Set in Central Europe, it has both town blocks and open areas. As the name suggests, its main feature is a large railway through the middle of the station at its center. A local mechanic was added in the form of 3 countdown timers at the station itself that would start when a tank enters the station. By the time the clock hits 0, 2 trains will have arrived from both spawns at the station. The city area has very intricate building blocks, with some of them having elevated platforms around them, making for quite the dynamic flank. However, there is once again quite some distance at the front line, which prevents close range brawls, but there are maybe some possibilities underneath the station itself. So on top of the station, it is also quite the eye-catching feature of the map and forms quite a unique location at its center. However, I am not sure how I think about the one-time limited cover over the railways themselves in order to reach the station safely. There are some ramps halfway, but having no further cover on top just for relocation seems quite the major thing to leave out. On the other hand, you do prevent some advantageous position at higher elevation. The center hill is fine for light tanks, having this time seemingly enough cover behind enough relief, with an additional little nook they can hide in. The right flank is quite open in the middle with relatively low amounts of relief, making it quite risky Hail Mary flank to push. The corners provide more relief with more cover. Now, the top right corner had a very interesting ruined castle in the previous version, which I want to be mirrored on the other corner, or even better, as an alternative feature on the middle of the right flank. However, Wargaming did none of that, instead removing that interesting castle feature with a more generic layout, and did nothing with the middle flank, so that's quite bad. So seemingly the latest version has nothing done closely to my imagined improvements, so I do think it's going to be quite a lackluster map. Radio station. Type, summer map. Size 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post 4th iteration. Estimated release 2026 or 2027. Featuring a radio and observation stations with several facilities spread around. The map doesn't have local mechanics, but did went through a big overhaul, big enough that the newer version was called V2 or version 2. Apparently this was due to the change of the map's level designer and the reason why it has 4 iterations so far in a relatively short period of time. The office area at the left only has tiny opportunities to get in close and personal. I think mainly because it's still quite open, missing some additional buildings in the open grass patches towards the middle of the map. The middle road with the bridge is somewhat more of a unique light tank area. It's quite funny they put bushes underneath the bridge, that way light tanks can only spot each other from that particular direction when they are very close, giving some interesting surprise moments. Speaking of interesting, the elevated radio station in the middle provides a unique additional flank for brawling. Because of the dense structuring, there is little to worry about from the left and has enough high ground to hide from the right. This does mean, however, that the right flank is very vulnerable because of this elevated middle area. And what does Wargaming put there? Just a couple small rocks and a couple small buildings. I just don't understand this. By leaving this flank so open, it renders it completely useless unless you know for sure your team got the entire middle ground covered. Just add some bigger and longer buildings to create at least some safety at the flank. Of course, you still need to keep an eye out. Of course, there are some opportunities do need to exist in order to engage with that flank from the middle. But now, if you go there, you can get permanently pinned down with very little space to maneuver. So where the middle of the map seems quite interesting and unique, the lack of solid cover on the sides prevents proper brawl and active assaults, making this a very monotone and bad map in the end. Oil. Type, summer map. Size, 1200 by 1200. Iteration, Supertest post 2nd iteration. Estimated release, 2027? located somewhere in the USA, featuring a big city and sandy coast area. Again, no local mechanics, but with again such a major change between iterations that it also bears that V2 mark. Again, we got some interesting structures with elevated platforms in the city areas, only the buildings are this time on a bigger scale, which might make flanking around those more risky due to the increase of time to make such maneuvers in these open spaces. Furthermore, there are some dips and hills around the flanks, but there are also some more open areas. Sometimes these openings could make the map more unique, however, in the middle towards the highway, it again can prevent some initial moves. Then the highway itself also suffers from a lack of solid cover for big distances, both on top and also somewhat underneath, where if you traverse you might get pinned down rather easily. However, the multi-levels in the city makes it nevertheless quite unique and exciting. Now the other flank is where something great happened. You see the major change which made this a V2 tackle the problem we discussed on radio station. That one flank that was way too open and barren for solid cover. With all, it was the same on the left flank, where it also had only a few small bits and pieces of cover that were sparsely added, making it quite a useless flank. However, now you got layer upon layer of cover, creating essentially 3 to 4 sub-flanks on that entire main flank. This is exactly what I want to see in World of Tanks maps. Having multiple avenues so you can carefully choose and switch around to find new angles of approach. This should be the main example for designing all frontline locations. And this is what I was missing with the radio station map, but is implemented extraordinarily well in this map, making it, with the exciting layout of the city, one of my favorites so far. Radar. Type, summer map. Size 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post second iteration. Estimated release 2027. A map with lots of open space and some urban blocks at a unknown location. No local mechanics, although there seems to be what look like fog in the middle riverbed. I like the asymmetric cluttering of small buildings in the town. It makes close range brawling subconsciously more apparent since players are not strictly recognizing the actual front line at the halfway point. The layout of the riverbeds makes it quite a unique avenue where light tanks could potentially go, having also a couple sub-flanks they can surprise each other around. However, this also can make it a more prevalent flank for mediums and heavies, as the light tanks are forced to go at the edges around it. But I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. Light tanks are quite flexible since the map is still relatively open. It is at least something else than the typical light tank hill feature or bump, where only they can properly get without too much counters. Now the radar station itself doesn't look that great. With an elevated route around in the top corner, it makes hiding behind the smaller hangars right there pretty useless, limiting the amount of potential close range Gauss players would like to have, with too much distance once again between the bigger hangars, which are the only safe bets to hide behind from the view of that high ground. However, with only that flank needed of a proper makeover, I still think this map is at least average and has potential to be among the best maps. Serpentine. Type, summer map. Size 1000 by 1000. Iteration, Supertest post first iteration. Estimated release 2027-2028. A new Italian map where experimentation with terrain continues. This time almost the entire map consists of a winding mountain slope, a serpentine road. Again, no local mechanics are mentioned, but there are some prevalent fires with smoke plumes at the slopes, which are even being marked on the minimap. Okay, is it me or are the maps only getting more open? There isn't really a front line with loads of buildings or rocks for heavy tanks, nor are the flanks really that isolated from each other. The best thing that you got is some isolation on the top left corner, but even there the road on top is already overexposed to the middle of the map, giving very little space for brawling possibilities. Like empty road, I feel some kind of respect for the embrace of the openness again, and being forced to explore and find other avenues with your heavy tank can also be exciting from time to time. Light tanks will absolutely have a field trip in this open middle with plenty of bushes and slopes to hide behind. Having the bottom right half of the entire map so open, it's quite tricky to find any opportunities for advances, as it seems. I hope that at least the feature smoke plumes are providing additional cover and have spotting reduction properties for both sides, both the one occupying the smoke and the one outside looking at the player in the smoke. In terms of uniqueness, I can definitely give it good marks, but how this might actually play out in practice, I just cannot tell at this moment. Greenland. Type, summer map. Size 1200 by 1200. Iteration, Supertest post first iteration. Estimated release, 2028. Located somewhere in the east, with the core idea of creating a new large urban map for close quarters combat. The first urban map in the Supertest since Stalingrad 12 years ago. I will start off generally saying that I really like the layout of this new urban map concept. It isn't like your Himmelsdorf or Small Ends or Stalingrad back in the day, where most of the map was dominated with building blocks. Here you've got distinctly different flanks with distinctly different themes throughout the middle. The whole urbanism is pushed more towards the side, which gives more ample opportunity for unique frontline locations. But for this map, the devil is in the details. The openness at the north side of the map with those walled off parts are great. However, it seems to be too little intricate relief within those parks, making it harder to use or traverse over. More ditches or small valleys are needed there in order to get proper use out of it. This is also because the top corners here seems very elevated in contrast, giving a lot of view towards the area in the middle. Hopefully there aren't many sniper spots with bushes and solid cover over there, otherwise it needs to be flattened out more. Again, great choice of feature with the fort in the middle, creating a close little brawl arena. Unfortunately, the walls this time also pose a problem because they are actually accessible, giving massive overview to the conqueror of the fort. Now, I do think it will be quite contested, so of course the victor out of that can get the advantage as a prize. But it's also imbalanced, giving most of the wall overview for the eastern side towards the west. Also, the tunnel, again, good addition, is also not symmetrical and poses some imbalance. Finally, the dockyard looks once again amazing, with several hangars creating that cover within surround cover. Again, I'm a big fan of that. But I spot only one shipping crate on the main path over the ships. I mean, come on, there should be way more scattered about to create another interesting flank where you can crawl in closer and closer towards the conflict, or have better opportunities to retreat bit by bit. So if these details get improved, this map is going to be great. And already the way it looks as a concept, I should give it the status of a good map. And finally, Fortress Bay or Pirate Bay. Type, summer map. Size 1100 by 1100. Iteration, Supertest post first iteration. Estimated release 2029. Another map in Italian setting, this time featuring a bigger fort and city areas, and a long flat road and railway through the middle. Both features quite some big open spaces to cross, but this time it gets a bit cancelled out by the amount of multi-level flanks both sides also have, still creating enough avenues between different heights to progress your advance. The straight flat train line through the middle towards the bases does create easy early spots for the light tanks. But next to that, on both sides, there are ample elevations to immediately cover behind with some additional buildings, which creates features for flanking around when having the middle front line conquered, and also as good last stand locations, which I've seen on most of these new maps and I am still very much in favor for. I also like the dips around the city and fort areas that provide some additional cover, but doesn't give an enormous advantage whoever gets the upper hand in the city or fort. What would have happened if it were to be placed in the middle of the map with sides all around. So this is the only map where I don't really have much concrete improvements or immediate fixes with this overview. So I think it's also going to be another great map. So those were the 15 maps that are currently in the Supertest for development. Well, except for Swamp, but maybe it can go back, but with better improvements. So finishing up with some general insights or trends that I noticed just finishing up the video, because it's already getting quite long. So more significant bigger map, because 3 of the 50 maps are 1100 by 1100 and 4 being 1200 by 1200, with also having more accessible surface, which in contrast to another relatively new map, Oyster Bay, which is 1300 by 1300, has covered with all around inaccessible ocean. This time there is even more area to explore, but with that more useless open space that get like cheated in or something like that. I am really curious how that will pan out to be gameplay wise, having so much additional space to traverse. I think this makes maximum view range and maybe even your radio equipment actually getting more important in these bigger maps. Another thing what I noticed is a lot more multi-level flanks. We have seen elevation within particular flanks, either with bridges, with bunkers, with just generally areas across other areas, especially with maps with elevators. Biggest example right there. So the first time we have seen such a multi-level flank on these scales was with the also relatively new map Safe Haven, with their bunker in the middle. Having that as the front line, it does cause sometimes frustrations when you get spotted. That's the only thing that I have some trouble with, that if you are not in line of sight, but you are on top of each other, you will still get spotted. Proximity range doesn't function like a dome, which gets blocked off at the ground you are standing on. It is an entire globe that uncovers every level that is within it. However, with more intricacy within those multi-level flanks, I do think at least will make those flanks more interesting, creating more different spots and opportunities in order to find another angle to fire at your opponent. Of course, a lot of focus on the newly introduced concept of local mechanics. Most of the local mechanics I do not really see as a big problem, not entirely gameplay wise. The biggest example here was those bunker doors that are opening up flanking maneuvers, but that particular implementation of such a local mechanic was pretty much perfect in my opinion. So I think it is a good way to add some extra spice into those maps. actually maybe even better than random events, which sometimes can block off flanking possibilities. For example, again with the Safe Haven map. Because most of the random events on other maps, like I mentioned before with Runeberg or Siegfried Line, I would have liked it if those features are just there permanently. And finally, I have noticed that I mostly gave positive gradings to these maps. There are no maps in here where I think, oh, this is going to be the next Empire's Border. There are no heinous maps like that. There are still 4 maps here that I think are not that good, but can be elevated to an average state when the proper changes are made. But 5 of them are already okay or average in my opinion. They're not good or great, but well, at least they're not bad. And on top of that, we got 6 of them that are better than average, which I think is a very good trend that we are seeing right here. So I do got my hopes up a bit, but of course it all depends on when these maps are going to be implemented. I have given my estimated release years when I think those maps are going to get implemented in the game, but of course that isn't set in stone. But with that, at least it's something to look out for and, well, keep on pushing Wargaming to actually implement. So with that, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Laters!